The lawyer's office smelled like old books and expensive furniture polish. I sat in a leather chair across from Mr. Peterson, my father's estate attorney, trying to focus on what he was saying through the fog of grief. My dad had been dead for 3 weeks. I was 25 years old, and I thought I was there to hear about the will, maybe inherit the hardware store he'd owned, figure out what to do with his house. I had no idea I was about to inherit something much worse. "Sophie, I need you to understand something before we go through these documents," Mr. Peterson said, his expression grave. "Your father's estate is what we call insolvent. That means the debts exceed the assets significantly." "Okay," I said, not really understanding. "So there's no inheritance?" "That's fine. I didn't expect anything. It's more complicated than that." He opened a folder thick with papers. "Your father co-signed on your student loans when you were 18. Do you remember that?" "Of course. I just finished paying those off last year. I'd graduated with $62,000 in student loans, worked my way through school, lived cheaply, and finally paid off the last payment 6 months ago. It had felt like freedom. Actually, those weren't the only student loans he co-signed." Mr. Peterson slid a document across the desk. "These are private loans in your name that he co-signed when you were a sophomore. $48,000. I stared at the paper. "That's not possible. I never took out $48,000 in private loans." "According to these documents, you did. Your signature is here." He pointed to a line. The signature looked like mine, but I had no memory of signing this. "Your father may have signed on your behalf." My stomach dropped. He forged my signature? We'd need a handwriting expert to confirm that, but given what else we've found, it's likely. Mr. Peterson pulled out more papers. "Your father also took out several business loans to keep the hardware store operating. You're listed as a co-signer on 3 of them." "I never co-signed any business loans. I didn't even know the store was struggling." "Your father presented these documents showing your signature as guarantor. The loans total $187,000. The store filed for bankruptcy 8 months ago, which means the creditors are now pursuing the guarantors. That's you." The room was tilting. "I don't understand. How is this legal? I never signed anything." "If he forged your signatures, you can fight it in court. But that will take time, money, and there's no guarantee you'll win. In the meantime, the creditors will pursue collection." He kept pulling out more documents. "There are also 2 credit cards in your name that your father opened approximately 4 years ago. Combined balance of $31,000. "Stop," I said. My voice sounded strange, distant. "How much total?" Mr. Peterson looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Between the private student loans, the business loan guarantees, the credit cards, the second mortgage on the house that you co-signed when you were 21, I didn't co-sign a mortgage. According to the bank, you did. That's another $243,000, and the house is underwater by about $90,000 given current market value." He closed the folder. "In total, you're potentially liable for approximately $512,000 in debt that your father incurred in your name or with you as guarantor." $512,000. I was 25 years old, making $42,000 a year as a junior graphic designer, living in a studio apartment in Portland, Oregon. I had $1,100 in my savings account, and I'd just inherited $500,000 in debt from my dead father. "This has to be illegal," I said. "He can't just put debt in my name without my knowledge. It is illegal if he forged your signatures. But proving that and unwinding these debts will require lawyers, time, and court proceedings. In the meantime, you're on the hook. The creditors don't care about your relationship with your father or whether you knew about these loans. They care about getting paid." "I can't pay $500,000. That's impossible." "I understand. There are options. Bankruptcy, debt settlement, fighting the fraudulent charges individually. But all of those options have consequences and costs." He pushed a business card across the desk. "This is a bankruptcy attorney I recommend. You should consult with her immediately. I took the card with numb fingers. 3 weeks ago, I'd gotten a call that my father had died of a heart attack in his apartment above the hardware store. I'd flown home to Seattle, planned a funeral, sorted through his things, cried myself sick. I'd been grieving the loss of my dad, the complicated, charismatic man who'd raised me after my parents divorced when I was 8. Now I was grieving something else. The realization that the father I thought I knew had systematically destroyed my financial future before he died. My name is Sophie Martinez, and this is the story of how I inherited nothing but debt, betrayal, and the choice between letting it destroy me or finding a way to survive what my father left behind. Let me take you back to the beginning, before I knew any of this. Before the lawyer's office, before the funeral, before the phone call that changed everything. I'd moved to Portland 2 years earlier, fresh out of college with a graphic design degree and dreams of working in the creative industry. I'd landed a job at a small marketing agency, making $42,000 a year. Not much, especially in Portland, but enough to rent a studio apartment, buy groceries, and slowly pay down my student loans. My relationship with my father had always been complicated. He was charming, big-hearted, the kind of guy who'd give you the shirt off his back, but couldn't manage his own life. After my parents divorced, he got custody of me and my younger brother Daniel. My mom remarried quickly and moved to California. Daniel went to live with her when he turned 16. I stayed with Dad. He owned a small hardware store in a Seattle neighborhood that was slowly gentrifying. The store had been his dream, his identity. But he was a terrible businessman. Creative, personable, generous to a fault, but couldn't manage inventory, payroll, or basic accounting. I'd helped him with the books sometimes during college, trying to make sense of the chaos. "Don't worry, Soph," he'd always say when I'd point out problems. "It'll work out." It always does. Except it didn't work out. And instead of admitting failure or asking for help, he'd apparently decided to commit fraud using my identity to keep the fantasy alive a little longer. The week after the meeting with Mr. Peterson, I started getting calls. Collection agencies, law firms, creditors. They'd gotten notice of my father's death and were pursuing the co-signers and guarantors, which meant me. "Ms. Martinez, this is regarding your outstanding balance of $48,600 on your private student loan. We need to discuss payment arrangements. Ms. Martinez, you're listed as guarantor on a business loan that's now in default. The total amount due is $63,000. We need immediate payment or we'll be forced to pursue legal action." The calls came daily, sometimes multiple times a day. I stopped answering my phone. Let them go to voicemail. Listened to the messages pile up, each one another knife in my chest. I called my mother. We hadn't been close since she remarried and started a new family with her husband Brad. She had 2 young kids now, a comfortable life in Orange County. I was a reminder of her first marriage, the struggling years, the man she'd escaped from. "Mom, did you know Dad was using my identity to take out loans?" "Sophie, I haven't talked to your father in years. Whatever mess he created, that's between you and him." "He's dead, Mom. And he left me with $500,000 in debt. I need help." There was a long pause. "Have you talked to a lawyer?" "Yes, but lawyers cost money I don't have." "Sophie, I'm sorry this happened. I really am. But Brad and I have our own family to take care of. We can't take on your father's debts. You need to figure this out yourself." She hung up. I sat in my studio apartment, staring at my phone, realizing I was truly alone in this. My mother had made it clear she wasn't going to help. Daniel was 22, still in college on Mom's dime, barely speaking to me since Dad died. My father's family was small and fractured. I had friends, but how do you explain to your 20-something friends that you just inherited $500,000 in debt? I met with the bankruptcy attorney Mr. Peterson had recommended. Her name was Linda Chen, probably in her 50s, professional and direct. "Bankruptcy is an option," she said after reviewing my situation. "Chapter 7 would discharge most of these debts. But there are complications. The student loans, even if they're fraudulent, are very difficult to discharge in bankruptcy. You'd need to prove undue hardship, which is a high bar. What does that mean for me? It means even if you file bankruptcy, you'd likely still be responsible for at least the student loan debt. That's $48,000, plus my fees for the bankruptcy filing, which start around $1,500 for a simple case. Yours isn't simple, so we're looking at probably $3,000 to $5,000 in legal fees. Money I didn't have. What if I try to prove the signatures were forged? You can try. You'd need to hire a forensic handwriting expert, file fraud claims with each creditor individually, potentially sue your father's estate. That's tens of thousands in legal fees, and there's no guarantee you'd win. Even if you prove fraud, the estate has no assets to recover. The creditors might still pursue you. So my options are bankruptcy that doesn't solve the whole problem and costs money I don't have, or fighting fraud claims that cost even more money, with no guarantee of success? Essentially, yes. Or the third option, which is trying to negotiate settlements with each creditor individually. Offer to pay pennies on the dollar, set up payment plans, work with debt consolidation. It's a long process, and your credit will be destroyed, but you might be able to reduce the total amount owed. How long would that take? Years, maybe a decade. I left that meeting feeling hopeless. I was 25 years old, and my choices were file bankruptcy, spend years fighting fraud claims I couldn't afford to pursue, or spend the next decade paying off debt I never agreed to take on. That night, I looked at my budget. Rent was $1,200 for my tiny studio. Utilities, phone, internet, another $200. Groceries maybe $300 if I was careful. Car insurance, gas, basic necessities, another $300. My take-home pay after taxes was about $2,900 a month. That left maybe $800 a month that I could theoretically put toward debt. At that rate, it would take me 53 years to pay off $500,000, not accounting for interest. 53 years, I'd be 78. The grief mixed with anger in a toxic combination. I'd grieve for the father I'd lost, then I'd remember what he'd done and the grief would turn to rage. How could he do this to me? How could he steal my identity, forge my signatures, saddle me with debt that would define the rest of my life? And he'd never have to face consequences because he was dead. He'd escaped, left me holding the bag. I started having panic attacks, waking up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, unable to breathe, the weight of the debt crushing my chest. I'd go to work and stare at my computer screen, unable to focus, thinking about the calls I was ignoring, the debt piling up interest, the future I'd planned disappearing. My boss noticed. "Sophie, is everything okay? Your work has been slipping lately." "Family stuff," I said vaguely. "My dad died recently." "I'm so sorry." "Take whatever time you need." But I couldn't take time. Time meant less money, and I needed every dollar. I picked up freelance work, designing logos and websites in the evenings and weekends. Added another $800 a month, but it meant working 70-hour weeks and still barely making a dent. August 2021, 2 months after my father died. I'd been ignoring the creditor calls, but they were escalating. Legal notices arriving at my apartment, threats of lawsuits, wage garnishment warnings. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called the largest creditor, the one holding the business loan for $63,000. Got transferred through 3 people before reaching someone who could actually help. "Ms. Martinez, we've been trying to reach you for weeks." "I know. I've been dealing with my father's death and trying to figure out what's legal and what's not. Whether or not you authorized the loan, your signature is on the guarantee documents. That makes you liable. We need to set up a payment plan. I can't pay $63,000. I make $42,000 a year. We can set up a manageable monthly payment. Based on your income, we'd accept $350 a month. $350 a month for one loan. And there were 6 other creditors. For how long? The term would be 20 years at current interest rates. 20 years. I'd be 45. Half my life paying for my father's failed business. I need to think about it, I said, and hung up. That's when I did something I'm not proud of. I started researching how to disappear, how to change your identity, move to another country, escape debt by becoming someone else. I spent hours reading forums about people who'd done it, the logistics, the costs, the consequences. I was 25 years old, and I was seriously considering abandoning my life because my father had destroyed my future. Then I got a call from Daniel, my younger brother, who I hadn't spoken to since the funeral. "Sophie, Mom told me about the debt situation." "Yeah, it's pretty bad." "I'm sorry." "That's so messed up that Dad did that to you." It was the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged how wrong this was. I started crying. "I don't know what to do, Daniel. I can't pay this. I can't fight it. I feel like my life is over before it started." "It's not over," he said. "You're the strongest person I know. You practically raised me when Mom left. You helped Dad even though he was impossible. You've always figured things out. You'll figure this out too." "I don't see how." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But giving up isn't you. Don't let Dad's mess define who you become." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment and realized something. I could spend the next decade being a victim of my father's choices. Or I could decide that this debt, as unfair and crushing as it was just one part of my story. Not the ending. Not my identity. Just an obstacle that I'd have to find a way around, over, or through. I didn't know how yet. I just knew that disappearing or giving up wasn't the answer. September 2021, 3 months after inheriting the debt. I made a plan. Step 1. Separate what I could fight from what I couldn't. Step 2. Negotiate everything possible. Step 3. Find a way to increase my income dramatically because my current salary would never be enough. I started with the credit cards. Called each company, explained the situation, demanded proof that I'd actually signed the applications. For 2 of the cards, the signatures were obviously not mine. I filed fraud claims. It would take months to resolve, but I started the process. The student loans were trickier. The signatures looked close enough to mine that proving fraud would be nearly impossible. But private student loans had some flexibility. I called the lender. "I can pay $200 a month. That's all I can afford. The minimum payment is $450. Then I'll default and you'll get nothing. $200 a month for 10 years, or you can chase me for 20 years and maybe get paid, maybe not." They agreed to $200. A small victory, but it felt like something. The business loans were harder. These creditors were aggressive, already threatening lawsuits. I needed a lawyer, but I couldn't afford Linda Chen's rates. I found a legal aid clinic that took my case pro bono. A young attorney named Marcus, who was barely older than me but smart and motivated. "We're going to fight these," he said. "If we can prove you didn't sign the guarantees, we can get you released from liability. And if we can't prove it, then we negotiate the best settlement we can." It felt like I was building a life raft piece by piece while already drowning. But at least I was doing something. Taking action instead of just letting it crush me. Then, in October, 4 months after my father's death, something happened that I didn't see coming. Something that would change everything about how I approached this nightmare. My boss at the agency called me into her office. "Sophie, we need to talk about your future here." I assumed I was being fired. My work had been mediocre at best, distracted by the debt crisis. "I'm sorry," I started. "I know I haven't been at my best." "Stop," she interrupted. "I'm not firing you. I'm promoting you. Senior designer position. 68,000 salary. I know you're dealing with personal issues, and I know you've been doing freelance work at night. You're talented, Sophie. You're just overwhelmed. So I'm giving you more money and more responsibility, because I think you'll rise to it." 68,000. 26,000 more a year. After taxes, roughly 1,700 more a month. "Why?" I asked, stunned. "Because I lost my father when I was your age too. And I know how hard it is to rebuild when someone you love leaves you with nothing but problems. You deserve a chance." I cried in her office. The first good thing to happen in 4 months. A lifeline. With the extra income, I could breathe. Not easily, but I could breathe. I could pay rent, cover basics, and put $1,200 a month toward debt instead of $800. At that rate, with settlements and negotiations, maybe I could get out from under this in 15 years instead of 50. 15 years was still half my life, but it was better than giving up. That night, I looked at the photo of my father that I'd kept on my bookshelf. Taken at my college graduation, him smiling proudly, arm around my shoulders. I didn't know then that he'd already started using my identity to keep his dying business afloat. Didn't know he'd forge my name on documents that would haunt me for decades. "I don't forgive you," I said to the photo, "but I won't let this destroy me either." I put the photo in a drawer. I couldn't look at it every day. The grief and betrayal were too tangled together. November 2021, 5 months after the inheritance from hell. I'd settled 2 of the credit cards for 15 cents on the dollar, paying them off with my signing bonus from the promotion. Reduced my total debt from $512,000 to $463,000. Progress measured in inches. The business loan creditors had filed a lawsuit. Marcus was fighting it, arguing that the guarantees were fraudulent. The case would take at least a year to resolve, but in the meantime, the debt was in legal limbo. They couldn't garnish my wages while we were in litigation. I'd started a blog about dealing with inherited debt. Writing about the experience was therapeutic, and surprisingly, people started reading it. Other people whose parents had destroyed their credit, left them with debts, forced them to rebuild from impossible situations. I wasn't alone. Then I got an email that would change everything again. A message from a woman named Rebecca who'd read my blog. "Sophie, I went through something similar. My father left me with $200,000 in debt when I was 23. I spent 7 years clawing my way out. Now I run a nonprofit helping young adults dealing with parental financial abuse. I'd like to talk to you about joining our organization. We need someone who understands this from the inside. The position pays $85,000 a year plus benefits. Are you interested?" $85,000. $43,000 more than my old salary. Enough to actually make real progress on the debt. Enough to rebuild. I stared at that email for a long time. 5 months ago, I'd been sitting in a lawyer's office learning that my father had destroyed my future. Now I had a chance to turn that destruction into something meaningful. To help other people avoid what I was going through. To use the worst thing that had ever happened to me as a foundation for something better. I wrote back one word. Yes. I met Rebecca Chen in a small coffee shop in downtown Portland 2 weeks after her email. She was in her early 30s, professional but warm, with the kind of calm energy that comes from surviving something terrible and coming out stronger. "Tell me your story," she said after we ordered. So I did. The whole thing. My father's death, the lawyer's office, the $500,000 in debt, the forged signatures, the isolation, the panic attacks, the months of trying to figure out how to survive this. She listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, her expression understanding in a way that told me she really did know what this felt like. "My father left me $200,000 when I was 23, Rebecca said when I finished. Business loans he'd co-signed me on without telling me. I was working in social work at the time, making $38,000 a year. I didn't think I'd ever recover. But you did. Eventually. It took 7 years of aggressive payoff, legal battles, and completely restructuring my life. But more importantly, I learned that I wasn't alone. There are thousands of young adults dealing with parental financial abuse. Parents who steal their kids' identities, rack up debt in their names, destroy their credit before they even start their adult lives. It's an epidemic nobody talks about. She pulled out her laptop and showed me the nonprofit she'd founded. Financial Recovery Alliance. They provided legal resources, credit repair assistance, financial counseling, and emotional support for young adults dealing with inherited or fraudulent parental debt. We've helped over 2,000 people in the last 4 years, Rebecca said. Some cases we can resolve quickly. Others take years. But everyone who comes to us gets support, information, and the knowledge that this isn't their fault and they're not alone. What would I do? I asked. I'm a graphic designer, not a financial counselor. You're someone who's living through this right now. That's more valuable than any credential. We need someone to run our peer support program, manage our online community, create content that helps people understand their options. Your blog has already reached hundreds of people. Imagine what you could do with organizational support. And the salary is really $85,000? Really? Plus full benefits, health insurance, 4 weeks vacation, and a flexible schedule. We understand that people dealing with debt need time for court dates, lawyer meetings, all of that. You'd have the freedom to manage your own recovery while helping others. It felt too good to be true. But Rebecca showed me the offer letter, the job description, the nonprofit's financial statements. It was real. Why me? I asked. You could hire someone with experience, credentials, someone who's already recovered. Because the people we serve need to see someone in the middle of it, someone still fighting. You give them hope that it's possible to survive this, even while it's happening. Your story matters, Sophie. I accepted the position that day. Gave my notice at the agency, which my boss understood. Started at Financial Recovery Alliance in January 2022, 7 months after my father's death. The office was small, just 6 people including Rebecca. There was Tom, a bankruptcy attorney who provided pro bono consultations. Maria, who handled credit repair and disputes. James, who ran financial literacy workshops. And now me, managing peer support and community outreach. My first day, Rebecca introduced me to the online community. Over 1,500 members, all dealing with some form of parental financial abuse. I read their stories, and it was like reading my own experiences reflected back dozens of different ways. A 22-year-old whose mother had opened 17 credit cards in her name, starting when she was 16. Total debt: $92,000. A 28-year-old whose father had taken out a business loan using him as co-signer without his knowledge. Lost his house when the business failed. A 26-year-old whose parents had stolen her identity so thoroughly she couldn't get a job because her credit was destroyed and she kept failing background checks. I wasn't alone. We were all trapped in variations of the same nightmare, trying to rebuild from the financial destruction our parents had left behind. I started hosting weekly support group meetings. Virtual sessions where people could share their stories, their victories, their setbacks. The first meeting, 12 people showed up. By the 3rd month, we had over 60 regular attendees. My dad called me yesterday, one woman shared. Asked me for money. I told him no, that I was still paying off the debt he left me with. He got angry, said I was being ungrateful after everything he'd done for me. The group understood in a way non-survivors couldn't. The complicated grief of loving someone who'd hurt you so badly. The anger mixed with guilt. The sense of obligation warring with the need for self-preservation. You don't owe him anything, I said. Your first responsibility is to yourself and your own recovery. It was advice I was still learning to follow myself. With my new salary, I restructured my entire debt repayment strategy. $85,000 a year meant about $5,400 a month after taxes. My expenses were still around $2,000 if I stayed in my modest studio. That left $3,400 a month for debt. I met with Tom, the bankruptcy attorney from the nonprofit, and Marcus, my legal aid lawyer. Together, we created a comprehensive strategy. The 2 credit cards I'd proven were fraudulent had been discharged, down to $434,000 total debt. The student loans, we couldn't prove fraud on those, but we'd negotiated them down to $200 a month on an income-driven repayment plan. Total remaining on those, $48,000 over 10 years. The business loans were in litigation. If we won, I'd be released from liability. If we lost, we'd negotiate settlements. Marcus was confident we'd win at least 2 of the 3 cases based on handwriting analysis, proving the signatures weren't mine. The mortgage was the biggest problem. $243,000 on a house that was worth maybe $150,000 in the current market. My father's estate was in foreclosure. I could walk away and let the bank take the loss, but it would destroy my credit for 7 years. Or I could try to fight it as fraudulent. Fighting it will take time, Tom said. But if we can prove you never signed the mortgage documents, you're not liable. The bank eats the loss, not you. We filed the fraud claim in February 2022. The bank immediately challenged it. This was going to be a long battle. Meanwhile, I was putting every extra dollar toward debt. $3,400 a month going to various creditors. In 6 months, I paid off $68,000. Watching that total number drop from $434,000 to $366,000 felt like running a marathon where the finish line kept moving, but at least I was making progress. My work at the nonprofit became more than just a job. It became a mission. I created resources for people fighting identity theft by parents, step-by-step guides for filing fraud claims, negotiating with creditors, protecting yourself legally. I wrote articles about the emotional toll of parental financial abuse, the complicated grief, the anger, the path to recovery. One article I wrote, titled, "When the Inheritance is Debt," went viral. Over 200,000 views. People shared it everywhere, tagging friends, saying, "This is exactly what I went through." News outlets picked it up. I got interviewed by NPR about parental financial abuse. Suddenly, I wasn't just a victim of my father's choices. I was an advocate, a voice for thousands of people dealing with the same trauma. March 2022, 9 months after my father's death. I got a call from Marcus. "We won," he said. "The judge ruled in our favor on 2 of the 3 business loans. Your signatures were definitively proven to be forgeries. You're released from liability. That's $137,000 you no longer owe." I sat down hard in my desk chair. $137,000. Gone. Just like that. My total debt dropped from $366,000 to $229,000. For the first time since the lawyer's office, I felt something that might have been hope. The 3rd business loan was still in litigation, but Marcus was optimistic. The remaining big battle was the mortgage. That case would take at least another year. With the reduced debt load, I adjusted my budget, started putting $4,000 a month toward the remaining debt. At that rate, I could be completely debt-free in 5 years instead of 15. 5 years was still a long time at 26 years old, but it felt survivable. April brought an unexpected complication. I met someone. His name was David, and he came to one of our financial literacy workshops. He was dealing with his own debt issues, student loans, and credit card debt from helping his sick mother. Nothing as dramatic as my situation, but enough that he understood financial stress. We started dating carefully. I was upfront about everything from the beginning. "I'm in massive debt because of my father. I'm working constantly. I have panic attacks sometimes. I'm not an easy person to be with right now." "Neither am I," he said. "I'm in therapy for anxiety. I work 2 jobs. I haven't taken a vacation in 3 years. Maybe we're perfect for each other." It was the first real relationship I'd had since my father died. Everyone else I'd dated couldn't handle the weight of what I was dealing with. David got it. He understood that sometimes I'd cancel plans because I was too overwhelmed, that I needed to talk through financial decisions obsessively, that I had complicated feelings about family and trust. We moved slowly. No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people trying to build something real while dealing with the wreckage of their pasts. In June 2022, exactly 1 year after my father's death, I went back to Seattle for the first time since the funeral. Drove past the hardware store, which was now empty and boarded up. Drove past the apartment where he'd lived, where he'd died. Felt the familiar mix of grief and anger. I'd been in therapy since January, working through the betrayal, the abandonment, the complicated love for someone who'd hurt me so profoundly. My therapist, Dr. Williams, kept pushing me to separate my father's actions from my worth. "What he did to you was wrong," she said, "but it doesn't define you. You get to decide who you become, despite what he did." Standing outside that boarded-up store, I realized I'd been defining myself by his choices for a year. The debt he left me, the trauma he caused, the future he'd stolen. I'd let his worst act become my entire identity. "I'm more than this," I said out loud to the empty building. "I'm more than what you left behind." I drove to the cemetery, stood in front of his grave for the first time since the funeral. The anger was still there, but it felt different now, less consuming, more like a scar than an open wound. "I don't forgive you," I said, "but I'm not letting this destroy me. I'm building something better from the mess you left, not because you deserve it, but because I do." I left Seattle that day feeling lighter. Not healed, but healing. Understanding that recovery wasn't just financial. It was emotional, psychological. Learning to trust again. Learning that I was worthy of a future, despite inheriting nothing but debt. Back in Portland, the work at the nonprofit intensified. We were getting more funding, expanding our services. I was promoted to Director of Community Support, which came with a salary increase to $95,000. Every raise meant more money toward debt, faster progress toward freedom. August 2022, I paid off the remaining student loans. $48,000 gone. My debt was now down to $181,000, not counting the mortgage which was still being fought in court. I celebrated by taking David to dinner. Nothing fancy, just Thai food and cheap wine, but it felt like a victory worth marking. "You're going to be okay," he said. "You know that, right? You're actually going to get through this." "Yeah," I said, and for the first time, I believed it. September brought news on the mortgage case. The bank's lawyers had found documentation they claimed showed I'd been present at the signing. Photos from the closing, time-stamped and dated. Except the date was when I was in college, 300 miles away. I had proof I'd been in class that day. "This is good," Tom said. "They just proved their own fraud case. If they faked documentation to support their claim, the judge is going to rule in your favor." The hearing was scheduled for November. If we won, $243,000 of debt would disappear. I'd owe less than $50,000 total, almost all of it the remaining business loan. October 2022, 16 months after my father's death. I was managing the online community, now over 3,000 members, leading weekly support groups, writing articles, speaking at conferences about parental financial abuse. My story had become a platform to help others. A young woman named Ashley reached out. 23, discovered her father had destroyed her credit when she tried to rent her first apartment. $45,000 in debt she never authorized. "I don't know how to fight this," she wrote. "I feel so alone." "You're not alone," I replied. "I know exactly what you're going through. Let me help you." I walked her through everything I'd learned. How to file fraud claims, which lawyers could help, how to protect herself legally. Connected her with Tom for legal advice, Maria for credit repair. Within 3 months, she'd proven fraud on $32,000 of the debt and was fighting the rest. "You saved my life," she told me in a support group meeting. I was going to give up. "Your story gave me hope." That's when I understood what Rebecca had meant. My worst experience, the thing that had almost destroyed me, had become the foundation for helping others survive their own versions of hell. The court hearing for the mortgage case was November 15, 2022. I sat in the courtroom with Tom and Marcus, watching lawyers argue about signatures and documentation and fraud. The bank's lawyers presented their fake photos. We presented my college attendance records, credit card receipts from that day, showing I'd been 300 miles away, testimony from professors. The judge took 2 weeks to rule. On November 29th, the decision came. In my favor. The mortgage was fraudulent. I was released from all liability. The bank would take the loss on foreclosure. $243,000. Gone. My total debt was now $37,000. Just the remaining business loan that we were still negotiating a settlement on, from $512,000 to $37,000 in 17 months. I called Daniel to tell him. We'd been talking more regularly since that first call when I was at my lowest. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it. I'm so proud of you, Soph. I'm not done yet. Still got $37,000 to go." "Yeah, but that's nothing compared to where you started. You survived something that would have destroyed most people. You're incredible." I cried after we hung up, partially from relief, partially from grief for the year and a half I'd spent fighting my father's mistakes, partially from gratitude that I'd somehow found my way through. December 2022, 18 months after inheriting the debt. I negotiated a settlement on the final business loan. Offered them $12,000 to close out the $37,000 debt. They accepted. I paid it with money I'd saved from my salary increases. On December 23, 2022, I made the final payment. I was completely debt-free. Everything my father had left me, every forged signature, every fraudulent loan, every dollar of inherited disaster, gone. I was 26 years old, debt-free, and alive in a way I hadn't been since before that lawyer's office. David and I went to the coast that weekend, stood on the beach in the freezing December wind, watching waves crash against the rocks. "What now?" he asked. "You've spent 18 months fighting this. What do you do when the battle is over?" "Live," I said. "Just live." But it wasn't that simple. The debt was gone, but the impact remained. I'd lost 18 months to this fight. Missed experiences, opportunities, the freedom of my mid-20s. I was angry about that, even in victory. My therapist helped me process the grief that came after the debt was gone. "You're mourning what could have been," Dr. Williams said. "The life you would have had if your father hadn't done this to you." That's valid. I was mourning. But I was also building. The nonprofit work had become my career, my calling. I was helping hundreds of people navigate what I'd survived. My story had become a resource, a roadmap, proof that inherited debt wasn't a life sentence. January 2023, 19 months after my father's death. Rebecca called me into her office. "We've been awarded a major grant," she said. "We're expanding nationally. Opening offices in 5 cities. I want you to be our national director of programs. Oversee all our support services, training, community development. Salary would be $110,000. $110,000. 3 years ago, I'd been making $42,000 and thought that was success. Now I was being offered more than twice that, doing work that mattered, helping people survive what had almost destroyed me. "Yes," I said. "Absolutely yes." That night, I opened the drawer where I'd hidden my father's photo 18 months earlier. Looked at his face, smiling at my college graduation, proud and oblivious to the financial bomb he was about to detonate in my life. I still didn't forgive him. Maybe I never would. But I understood something now that I couldn't have understood back then. His choices had been his. My recovery was mine. He'd given me debt and trauma and grief. But what I built from that was entirely my decision. And I'd chosen to build something that mattered. I put the photo back in the drawer. Maybe someday I'd be able to look at it without pain. But not yet. And that was okay. February 2023, 20 months after my father's death. I was completely debt-free for the first time since I was 18 years old. You'd think that would feel like pure liberation. Instead, I felt unmoored. For 18 months, the debt had given me purpose, a clear enemy to fight, a measurable goal to chase. Now it was gone, and I had to figure out who I was without it. It's normal to feel lost after achieving something you've been fighting for, Dr. Williams told me. You've spent almost 2 years in survival mode. Now you have to learn how to thrive. Thriving felt foreign. I'd gotten so good at struggling, at pushing through exhaustion, at fighting impossible odds. Peace felt uncomfortable, like I was waiting for the next disaster. But slowly, I started to build a life that was mine, not a reaction to what my father had done. David and I moved in together in March. A small 2-bedroom apartment so I could have an office for the increasing amount of work I was doing from home. It was the first time I'd lived with someone since my father. The first time I'd trusted someone enough to share space and bills and a future. "Are you sure about this?" I asked him the night before we signed the lease. "I'm a lot to deal with. The nonprofit work is intense. I still have panic attacks sometimes. My relationship with money is complicated." "Sophie, you ran through hell and came out the other side," he said. "You think I'm worried about you having panic attacks? I'm in awe of you. Every single day. We made it work." He understood when I needed to take calls at odd hours from people in crisis. I understood when his own anxiety kicked in and he needed space. We built something real on a foundation of honesty about our damage. At work, the national expansion was consuming. We opened offices in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Seattle. Each office needed staff, training, systems. I was traveling constantly, setting up programs, training counselors, building networks with legal aid organizations. The Seattle office was particularly meaningful. Opening a nonprofit to fight parental financial abuse in the city, where my father had destroyed my credit, felt like claiming something back. I hired a director named Marcus, coincidentally the same name as my legal aid lawyer who'd fought so hard for me. "I want this office to be a resource for every young person dealing with what I dealt with," I told him. "Nobody should have to figure this out alone like I did." By summer 2023, we'd helped over 5,000 people. Some cases resolved quickly, fraudulent charges proven and discharged. Others were long battles like mine. But everyone got support, got told it wasn't their fault, got shown a path forward. I spoke at a financial literacy conference in June. Standing on that stage, telling my story to 300 financial professionals was surreal. 2 years earlier, I'd been sitting in a lawyer's office learning my life was destroyed. Now I was educating others about how to help people like me. After my talk, a woman in her 50s approached me. "My daughter is going through something similar. Her father, my ex-husband, left her with over $200,000 in debt. She's 24 and suicidal. Can you help her?" I gave her my card. "Have her contact me directly. We'll figure this out." Her daughter Melissa called me the next day. I heard my own story reflected in hers. The betrayal, the isolation, the sense that life was over before it began. I walked her through everything, connected her with our resources, told her what I wished someone had told me at the beginning. This is survivable. You will get through this. You are not alone. 6 months later, Melissa would join our nonprofit as a peer counselor. Her story was still unfolding, but she'd found purpose in the pain, just like I had. July 2023, I got a call from my mother. We hadn't spoken since she'd refused to help when I'd first learned about the debt. 26 months of silence. "Sophie, I saw your interview on NPR. I had no idea things had gotten that bad with your father. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you." The anger rose up immediately. "You weren't there because you chose not to be. I called you, and you told me to figure it out myself. I know, I was wrong. Brad and I were dealing with our own financial stress and I was overwhelmed. But that's not an excuse. You needed your mother and I abandoned you." I wanted to hang up, to tell her it was too late, that I'd survived without her and didn't need her now. But Dr. Williams and I had been working on forgiveness, not for the other person, but for myself. Holding on to anger was exhausting. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully. "But rebuilding trust takes time. You missed the worst period of my life. I can't just pretend that didn't happen." "I understand. Can we start somewhere? Coffee, maybe? Just talk?" We met 2 weeks later. It was awkward, painful, honest. She cried, talking about her own marriage to my father, how he'd financially abused her too, how she'd escaped and rebuilt and thought she'd left all of that behind. Finding out he'd done the same thing to me had brought back trauma she'd spent years recovering from. "That doesn't excuse me not helping you," she said. "But I need you to understand. I was terrified of being pulled back into his chaos, even after his death. I understood, even though it hurt. My father's damage had rippled out to everyone who'd loved him. My mother, me, Daniel, probably others I didn't even know about. We didn't fix everything that day, but we started. Careful, tentative steps towards something that might become a relationship again. August 2023, David and I went on our first real vacation. A week in Mexico, the first time I'd left the country since college. The first time in 2 years I'd taken more than a long weekend off. Learning to relax, to not think about debt or work or crisis, felt like learning a foreign language. On the beach one evening, David said, "I want to ask you something, but I need you to know there's no pressure." "Okay," I said, suddenly nervous. "I love you. I love who you are, how strong you are, how you've turned the worst thing that ever happened to you into something that helps thousands of people. I want to build a life with you, not just living together, but actual forever. Will you marry me?" He didn't have a ring. We were sitting on beach chairs in our swimsuits, drinking cheap beer, covered in sunscreen. It was perfect. "Yes," I said. "Absolutely yes." We got engaged with no ring, no plan, just a commitment to build something real together. I'd spent 2 years fighting my father's legacy. Now I was building my own. September 2023, I was invited to speak at TEDx Portland. The topic was Inherited Trauma and Chosen Recovery. I spent weeks writing that talk, refining it, making sure every word mattered. Standing on that red dot, looking out at the audience, I told my story. The lawyer's office, the $500,000 in debt, the isolation, the fight, the victory. But more than that, I talked about what it means to inherit someone else's mistakes and decide they don't define you. My father made choices that destroyed my financial future before I was old enough to understand what a credit score was, I said. He left me with debt I never agreed to, trauma I never asked for, and a choice I had to make. Let his worst act define me, or use it to build something better. I chose to build. Not because I forgave him, not because I wasn't angry, but because I refused to let his legacy be my limitation. The debt was his choice. The recovery was mine. And that's the power we all have when we inherit trauma, whether it's financial, emotional, or generational. We get to decide who we become despite what was done to us. The talk went viral. Over 2 million views in 3 months. I got messages from people all over the world dealing with variations of inherited trauma. Not just financial abuse, but generational poverty, family addiction, childhood neglect. People who'd been born into circumstances they didn't choose and were trying to build lives despite that foundation. I realized the work I was doing wasn't just about debt. It was about breaking cycles, about refusing to pass on the damage that had been passed to you, about choosing healing over bitterness. October 2023, Daniel came to visit. He was 25 now, the same age I'd been when I'd learned about the debt. He'd graduated college and was working in Seattle, dealing with his own complicated feelings about our father. "I'm angry at him," Daniel said over dinner, "but I also miss him." "Is that weird?" "No," I said. "I miss him too sometimes. The good parts of him. The dad who taught me to ride a bike and made terrible jokes and believed I could do anything. That person was real, even if the person who destroyed my credit was also real." "How do you hold both of those things?" "Therapy," I said honestly. "Lots of therapy. And accepting that people can be complicated. Dad loved us. He also hurt us. Both things are true." Daniel told me he'd been thinking about becoming a financial counselor, specifically to help people avoid what our father had done to us. "Your work inspired me," he said. "You turned something terrible into something meaningful. I want to do that too." I helped him apply to our nonprofit. He started as a junior counselor in our Seattle office in January 2024. Working alongside him, both of us channeling our father's damage into helping others, Felt like reclaiming our family story. November 2023, almost 2.5 years after my father's death, I received a package from Mr. Peterson, the estate attorney. Inside was a letter my father had written, dated 2 weeks before he died. My hands shook as I opened it. Sophie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've probably learned about the debt. I don't have excuses that will make this okay. I made terrible decisions. I used your name and your trust to keep my dying business afloat. I told myself I'd fix it before you ever found out, that I'd pay everything off and you'd never know. That was a lie I told myself to justify theft. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I did it anyway because I was too proud to admit failure, too ashamed to ask for help, too convinced I could turn things around if I just had more time. I sacrificed your future for my present, and that's unforgivable. I don't expect forgiveness. But I need you to know that my failure is not your failure. You are stronger, smarter, and more capable than I ever was. This debt isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of mine. Don't let what I've done limit what you become. I'm sorry, Sophie. I'm so sorry. I love you. I always loved you. I just didn't love you more than I loved my pride, and that's my greatest shame. Dad. I read that letter 3 times. Then I cried harder than I had since his funeral. Not because the letter changed anything. The debt had still been real. The trauma still happened. The betrayal was still a betrayal. But it confirmed something I'd been grappling with. He'd known. He'd known what he was doing, and he'd done it anyway. But he'd also known it was wrong. Had carried that shame. Had understood, at least partially, the damage he was causing. I showed the letter to Dr. Williams in our next session. "How does this make you feel?" she asked. "Sad," I said. "Angry. But also, I don't know. Like maybe he was more broken than evil. Like he was drowning and grabbed onto me to stay afloat, not understanding he was pulling me under too. Does that change anything for you? It doesn't undo what he did. But it helps me understand that he was human. Flawed, selfish, terrified of failure. His choices were still his choices. But I can hold space for his humanity while also acknowledging the harm he caused. I kept the letter. Put it in a folder with all the debt documents I'd saved, the legal filings, the settlement agreements, a complete record of the inheritance and the recovery. Someday, if I ever wrote a book about this, I'd want that letter included. Not to excuse him, but to show the complexity of it all. December 2023, David and I got married. Small ceremony, just close friends and family. Daniel was there. My mother was there. Rebecca from the nonprofit. Marcus, my legal aid lawyer who'd fought for me. People who'd been part of the survival and the rebuilding. We didn't have a fancy wedding. Used the money we would have spent on that to make donations to 3 nonprofits that helped young adults in crisis. It felt right, using our joy to fund someone else's recovery. Standing at the altar, saying vows to David, I thought about how different my life looked than I'd imagined it would 29 months earlier. I'd thought the debt was an ending. Instead, it had been a terrible, painful, transformative beginning. January 2024, the nonprofit reached 10,000 people served. 10,000 young adults who'd gotten help fighting parental financial abuse. Some were completely free of debt. Others were still fighting. But all of them knew they weren't alone. I was promoted to Chief Program Officer. Salary jumped to $135,000. I was 27 years old, married, leading a national organization, completely debt-free with money and savings. The contrast to 25-year-old Sophie sitting in that lawyer's office was almost incomprehensible. We launched a new program in March 2024, Prevention Education. Going into high schools and colleges to teach young people about identity theft, how to protect themselves from parental financial abuse, what signs to watch for, where to get help. If we could prevent even a few people from experiencing what I'd experienced, it would be worth it. I taught my first prevention workshop at a Seattle high school. Looked out at those teenagers, hoping none of them would ever need the information I was giving them, knowing statistically some of them would. Your parents are supposed to protect you, I said. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes they hurt you, even when they love you. If that happens, it's not your fault. You're not responsible for their choices. And there are people who will help you survive it and build something better. A girl raised her hand. What if you still love them, even though they hurt you? Then you love them, I said. Love and boundaries aren't mutually exclusive. You can love someone and still protect yourself from them. You can grieve what they could have been while accepting who they actually were. After the workshop, that same girl approached me. My mom opened credit cards in my name. I'm 17. I don't know what to do. I gave her every resource we had. Got her connected with a counselor that day. Helped her file a police report and fraud claims. Caught it early, before the debt became crushing. That's what prevention looked like. Catching the damage before it became inherited trauma. April 2024, Rebecca announced she was stepping down as executive director of the nonprofit. She wanted to focus on policy work, lobbying for laws that would make parental financial abuse easier to prosecute. The board asked me to take her place. Me, at 27, leading a national organization with 40 employees and a 7-figure budget. You're the right person for this, Rebecca said. You know what our clients are living through because you lived it. You have the vision, the passion, and the skills. Plus, you survived $500,000 in inherited debt. Running a nonprofit budget will be easy compared to that. I accepted. Became the youngest executive director in the organization's history. Not despite my father's betrayal, but because of what I'd learned surviving it. May 2024, nearly 3 years after my father's death, I gave a keynote address at a national financial counseling conference. 1,500 financial professionals in the audience. I told them about the epidemic of parental financial abuse, the legal gaps, the resources available, the ways they could help clients dealing with inherited debt. After my speech, dozens of counselors approached me with stories. Clients they'd worked with, similar situations, the lack of resources and awareness. We exchanged information, built networks, created a movement. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was thousands of stories, all of us connected by the experience of inheriting damage we didn't choose and deciding to recover anyway. June 2024, I went back to my father's grave for the second time. 3 years since his death. I brought flowers, which felt strange given everything, but I brought them anyway. I don't forgive you, I told the headstone. Maybe I never will. But I've stopped letting what you did define me. I've built a life that's mine. Helped thousands of people survive what you put me through. Turned your worst act into something that actually matters. I'm angry that I lost years to fixing your mistakes. I'm sad that you never got to see who I became despite what you did. But I'm also grateful, in a weird way, that the struggle forced me to become stronger than I would have been otherwise. You were a terrible businessman, and an even worse financial decision-maker. But you were also my dad. You taught me to be persistent, to fight for what mattered, to help people. You probably didn't mean to teach me those things through your own failure, but that's what happened. I'm okay, Dad. Despite everything, I'm okay. And I'm making sure other people are okay too. That's your legacy now. Not the debt, the recovery. I left the flowers and drove away. Felt lighter than I had in 3 years. July 2024, David and I bought a house. Small, modest, but ours. I never thought I'd be able to own property after inheriting $500,000 in debt. But there we were, signing mortgage papers, getting keys, moving into a home we actually owned. The first night in the house, David and I sat on the floor surrounded by moving boxes, drinking wine out of coffee mugs because we hadn't unpacked the real glasses yet. 3 years ago, were you living? He asked. 3 years ago, I'd just learned about the debt. I was in crisis mode, barely surviving, pretty sure my life was over. And now? Now I'm married to someone I love, leading an organization that helps thousands of people, living in a house I own, completely debt-free with money and savings. It's surreal how much can change when you refuse to let the worst thing that happens to you become your entire story. August 2024, I got an email from Ashley, the young woman I'd helped early in my nonprofit work. She was now debt-free, working as a financial counselor, helping others navigate what she'd survived. "You told me I'd get through this," her email said. "I didn't believe you. But you were right. I'm on the other side now, and I'm using what I learned to help others. Thank you for showing me it was possible." That's what legacy looks like. Not what you inherit, but what you pass on. My father left me debt and trauma. I was leaving a path forward for others, proof that inherited damage doesn't have to be inherited limitation. I'm 28 now, 3 years and 2 months past that lawyer's office. I run a national nonprofit that's helped over 12,000 young adults fight parental financial abuse. I'm married to someone who loves me despite and because of all I've survived. I own a home. I have savings. I'm completely debt-free. But more than any of that, I'm no longer defined by what my father did to me. I'm defined by what I chose to do with it. If you're reading this and you're dealing with inherited debt, parental financial abuse, or any kind of generational trauma, I need you to hear this. It's not your fault. You didn't choose this, but you get to choose what happens next. You can let it destroy you, or you can survive it, process it, heal from it, and use it to build something better. Not better than if it never happened, because what happened still happened, and that damage is real. But better than staying stuck in victimhood, letting someone else's worst choices limit your potential. The debt I inherited was $512,000. The choice I made was mine. And that choice, to fight instead of surrender, to recover instead of collapse, to help others instead of staying bitter, that choice made all the difference. My father left me debt. I left myself recovery. And I'm helping others do the same. That's the inheritance that actually matters. Not what you're given, but what you choose to create from it. 3 years ago, I was 25 and alone, sitting in a lawyer's office learning my life was destroyed. Today, I'm 28 and surrounded by thousands of people I've helped survive the same destruction. My father's legacy was debt. Mine is recovery. And given the choice, I'll take recovery every time. To everyone out there fighting inherited trauma of any kind, you will survive this. You will build something better. You are not your parents' mistakes. You are your own choices, your own resilience, your own becoming. Don't let what you inherited limit what you create. The debt was theirs. The recovery is yours. And recovery, it turns out, is the most valuable inheritance you can give yourself.